Hello and welcome to Health and Wellness Master Session. Here we invite experts from different spheres of health and wellness to come and share their knowledge and experiences with us. A part of Ogilvy's open knowledge initiative called Making Health Matter. Every industry has stories, and so does pharma, especially the sales side. There's one story which is set about 40 to 50 years earlier in a small town in Bihar, where a group of doctors came to the railway station to meet up with a medical rep. Those were the times when the medical rep was a man of science, possibly the only source of knowledge for doctors. There were few pharma companies that time, and obviously there were few medical reps. Cut to the time when there was a proliferation of Indian pharma, proliferation of generics, and a whole lot of companies had a whole lot of reps meet up with the doctors. However, knowledge was limited. Therefore, the role of the rep got changed from being a man of science to a man of commerce. And that was the time when it was about who shouts out louder, who shouts longer, and who shouts more often, to be noticed, to be visible. Then came the time of the digital, when the platform of knowledge in itself changed. And therefore, pharma also recognized that the medical reps need to be supported with other avenues of communication. Then began the multi-channel marketing. However, despite that, the medical rep was the MVP, the most valuable player. However, COVID has changed a lot of things. COVID actually changed the way the doctor in himself is practicing. With lesser patients coming to him, face to face, the entire mechanics of telemedicine kicking in. There is a change in the way the doctor is looking at doing his healthcare practice. And this change is not going to be limited only to doctors. It has obviously impacted pharma, and it is impacting the medical rep in the way they have done business till now. To learn more about these changes, to learn more of the impact of these changes, to learn more about how the industry has responded to these changes and what these changes are likely to be in the future and how the response will be in the future, we have our guest today, Priya Hingorani. Priya is a vice president with GSK Pharma, handling multiple business responsibilities. Prior to GSK, Priya was a part of Johnson & Johnson Pharma for a long time and has played a role across multiple geographies there, handling P&Ls to handling commercial excellence to championing digital and IT there. Priya is considered by OPPI as one of the trailblazing women in the pharmaceutical industry. Who better than her to talk about the topic of today? Over to Priya for her 6 questions.
The MR is a pivotal link between the HCP and the organization. Since time immemorial, when the MR started visiting the medical professionals, some form of representation always came through them for the drugs and other products of the industry. I think we can reminisce back to the big brown bag that the MRs carried, which was a rectangular bag, and it was a symbol of pride when they went to meet the HCPs. In fact, the HCP made an image of the organization perceiving what the MR brought to them. I remember the time when we were management trainees and in the field, the respect that we got from the doctors was unparalleled. In fact, I remember a particular case in Kolaba where we used to go to meet this doctor at his clinic, and the time for the call was 3 p.m. But all medical representatives and their accompanying managers were asked to report at 2 p.m. Not to put their cards, not to keep a queue, but to be treated to piping hot samosas and a cool tall glass of sharbat before they started their detailing for the second half of the day. Such was the affection, and such is the affection that HCPs have for MRs even today. Recent studies have shown that the MR-HCP access has declined from 78% a couple of years ago to 46% recently. This decline has been multifactorial. First of all, there is a button click availability of information to the HCPs from seminars, from international KOLs, and from the latest trends in the field of medicine. Secondly, there is a multitude of MRs that is visiting the doctor's clinic. This is due to the proliferation of companies as well as therapeutic areas promoted by each company, therefore forcing a large number of MRs to come and visit the doctor. Third point, sadly but true, there is a qualitative deterioration in the way the MR deals with the HCP or disseminates the information to the HCP. Gladly, pharma has recognized this decline, and pharma has also recognized the reasons for this decline and is doing everything to stem this decline. Few organizations have made sure that they have innovative products or at least an innovative method to have an interaction with the doctors when they go to the clinic. They are also looking at beyond the pill measures to have an interaction with the HCPs which is meaningful to their practice as well as to their customers. The MR, unless he picks up this change and is willing to change, will be considered as an intrusion in the HCP's clinical practice. And therefore, it is essential that many of them who are skilled in communication to the doctors take it to the next level and become a value addition and a welcome visitor to the doctor's clinic as they were done in the past. Face-to-face interactions have always been the hallmark of MR-HCP meetings. With the advent of COVID, a lot has changed. Physical meetings are no longer possible for a multitude of reasons. One of them being that the availability of HCPs in the clinic is getting few and far in between. Add to this the fear of infections, the plethora of patients coming in who were not able to meet the HCPs earlier and therefore social distancing needs to be maintained. And in addition to that, the need of the HCPs to meet the MR, all these are changing. No longer is it going to suffice for the MR to be a bearer of only reminders or just brand information which is not unique. In fact, in the era of COVID, we have seen that nearly 78% of the HCPs moved to some form of digital or technology-led communication, whether it was SMSs, webinars, interaction over WhatsApp in some cases, or even video calling. Viva Engage became a platform in which many of the companies also engaged with the HCPs. Having said that, I think technology is here to stay. A survey carried out by IQVIA in over 500 HCPs spoke about the fact that nearly 50 to 60% of them would like to continue with these interactions for the future. What does it mean for the industry and for the MR? Very clearly, a lot of contextual information, a lot of differential information of value add to the HCP's practice is going to become mandatory. Just carrying something which is going to be a reminder will no longer be welcome. The HCP is going to prioritize which MRs they meet or which MRs they allow them to visit. In addition, I also feel technology is going to sweep the HCP not only from an MR-HCP interaction, but it is already seeing a change in the way the HCP is interacting with their patients. Through telemedicine, when the HCPs are meeting their most important customer by way of technology, there is no reason to believe that the MR will not face the same. Does it mean face-to-face interactions will go away? In my opinion, no. Omni-channel will be the way to go as we move ahead. Traditionally, the interactions between MR and HCPs have been face-to-face at preset frequencies. In fact, over the last few years, many of those interactions have become just brand or prescription request calls rather than value addition calls. What COVID-19 has heralded is a change that was imminent and on the anvil. This means that there has to be a huge mindset shift for both the HCP as well as for the MR in how they are dealing with each other. Nearly 83% of the HCPs have received some form of digital interaction or communication during the times of COVID. That said, it has been centrally driven. Many of the MRs today are comfortable only to the extent of digitization of the communication by means of an iPad detailing which they are doing with the doctor. Not necessarily a multi-channel interaction that is going to come forth. The mindset also has to shift from one of insecurity to the one of value addition to the doctor's clinic. The HCP has to be looked at as an individual who is adapting to technology fantastically well, and therefore the MR has to look as an equivalent adopter of technology equally quickly. Which means that we have to look at both, the MRs have to look at both the content of the communication that they're giving, the context of the communication that they're giving, looking at the doctor as an individual who is interacting with them, not at the set frequencies, probably with fewer number of doctors available to make those calls, in fewer number of hours, the one who is going to give patients priority and at the same time look at the MR for providing the value addition to his practice. This will mean that the MR needs to look at this as an opportunity to upgrade himself or herself and be the strong link that they have traditionally been between the pharmaceutical organizations and the HCP. COVID-19 has brought in humongous changes to all aspects of our lives. Leadership across the pharmaceutical industry has been extremely adaptive and agile to respond to this change. In fact, across operational and regulatory challenges, there was also the need to have a strategic look at how our go-to-market models are going to look for the future, as well as what the workforces would need to do in terms of their interaction with their customers. With patients looking at remote engagement and HCPs not being available, business continuity became important. But what was of prime importance was the safety and security of not only the employees but also of the customers and the patients. Hence, a lot of companies looked at lockdown as a point when people started working from home or engaged in remote calling or remote engagement with the HCPs. GSK was no different. However, we had a significant advantage. One advantage was that we had invested much earlier in the value chain in terms of digital and technological advancements. That meant our workforce was well equipped to deal with technological changes, with digital marketing, with all forms of interaction with the HCP, which were new. But it's easier said than done. What it also meant is to reskill and upskill the MRs in the way of interaction, which was minimally intrusive to the doctors, but at the same time effective enough to reach them from what they required from the MRs. It also meant that the content that was going on to the doctors had to be differential, and therefore our content strategies had to be relooked into. We had to look at how patients would be able to access our medicines, and therefore channels started playing a very, very important role, where GSK as an organization has invested very heavily in the past. In these changes, in these times of COVID, we have seen that there was opportunity also to look at strategic partnerships for digitals and analytics. And GSK and many other organizations have looked entirely across the value chain as to how they would like to reshape and realign the experiential learning, the interaction with HCPs, the interaction with customers, to provide a better future for the patients tomorrow. pharma industry in 2030 is going to look very different from what it looks today. This is no looking into a crystal ball. I think some part of the change has already started with COVID-19 coming in. But there are key trends that are already existing which show us that 2030 is going to be quite different. One, there is increasing government and regulatory landscape that is coming in with Make in India, positioning around what access that is coming to patients, digitization of many of the offerings of the government, like the National Digital Health Mission, which is in offering right now, or Ayushman Bharat. They are all shaping the landscape very, very differently. What I also expect to see is a change in market archetypes and go-to-market models. We will see an increasing play that will come in from channels, which will come in from beyond the HCPs, which will drive the way the market is going to grow. Patient is going to become more empowered, is more empowered today, but is going to get even more empowered, where their patient centricity is going to be extremely critical for companies to survive in the future. The competition will change through partnerships, collaboration, and close working between complementary competencies within organizations. Strategy and data analytics will play a very, very critical role beyond simple operations and execution that it is doing today. We will also see a significant change in the way technology is going to play a role within the industry, whether it is in the pharma supply chain, providing value in terms of blockchain technology or in terms of big data analytics. That change is here to stay. AI is clearly on the anvil, with us hearing about Google, Jio, Amazon, Samsung building in a bigger play in this market. Another area is going to be about public-private partnerships, real-world evidence, as well as health economic outcomes research, which will be very important to define which products are going to be value additions to the organizations. Innovative products are going to be here to stay, whether they come with technologies like nanotechnology or products that come with changes towards targeted therapies. Predictive and prescriptive analytics are going to stay. Customers have to be looked at as N is equal to 1. HCPs can no longer be looked at as a monolith which behaves in a similar manner, but we will have to look at them as each individual customized customer who is going to behave in a particular different manner. The trends that we see today in FMCG will not be very far away from where pharma will be tomorrow. And I think the organizations need to wake up in terms of more technology as well as talent to see how we are headed towards the future.
Thank you, Priya. That was wonderfully enlightening. Here are my takeouts of Priya's session. COVID has asked us to do a lot of rethinking. One, rethinking the way the HCP in themselves are doing their business, telemedicine being a driver there. Rethinking the way pharma is going to reach out to these HCPs where digital is the driver. Rethinking the preparedness on communications by pharma, which is in terms of content strategy, the MR skilling and reskilling, and channels for reaching out to the patients. Rethinking the strategy in itself, whether it is digitalization versus multi-channel, or it is rethinking the connect frequency and indeed the timing of reaching out to the doctors. Lastly, it was about rethinking the future, with the government and the regulatory changing the norms and setting course to newer things, with the channel playing a different role altogether, patient centricity coming to the fore even more, tech being a driver for both demand and supply side, and finally innovation, which is products coming out to be even more innovative than before. Dear viewers, we enjoyed bringing this session to you. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. We look forward to meeting you soon with a new episode of Making Health Matter.